Okay, market structures it is. So, as I said, I teach principles of micro, and so this is a lot of what I teach. And so, before I begin, you can get your activities out if you want. I'm going to kind of flip back and forth between just discussion and then going through those. The first one I found just pretty interesting. The chart that they have there is a nice way to kind of get your students to compare and contrast the various market structures. The second activity I do think would be really a good way to start introducing market structures, in that it walks through a couple of different markets and has the students find out those characteristics. Okay, so that's why when I get to that one, I think it's a great one. And then the third one, we'll be doing an activity. And this is one where you'll get your students up and moving, and they'll figure it out, and they'll really see what's kind of behind this concept of when we say perfect competition. We talk about competitive markets. And we talk about the result in there. We'll see that actually happen. The students will get up and move, and they will get to that result on their own, hopefully. Maybe you might push them in a little direction if they need some help. But it will really get them to see kind of what's going on here. So how many of y'all talk about market structures in your class? Okay, fantastic. It's okay. We're good. So what do y'all talk about? Let me get that before I jump into my whole spiel. I have this. This is kind of, when I start this section, I call it industrial organizations. Is that kind of, that's kind of where this stuff kind of is classified in what we do. Essentially, I just tell them it's how is industry organized. How do we kind of look at these various firms or businesses out there that we see? Your students can name tons of them. And then we're going to talk about why we might see prices high over here or low over here. Why do we only see a couple of firms serving this market, whereas we see a ton of firms and they're all kind of the same over here? And so I show this before we even really start talking about it, and it's really just a spectrum. This is kind of how I think about it. Whenever I introduce this stuff, I start with perfect competition, that one extreme. Okay? Then I go to the other extreme and talk about monopoly. And then the in-between, these concepts of imperfect competition are kind of right there in the middle. And so if we have time, I'll get to oligopoly. We typically get to monopolistic competition. How many of y'all cover maybe perfect competition and monopoly? Is that kind of the foundations there? Do y'all get to monopolistic competition, imperfect oligopolies? Y'all do get to all of them. Fantastic. Okay, I have all of those slides ready, and in the activity you'll see that as well. It's going to touch on all of them. And so this is one way to introduce it, really just kind of looking at the control, the market control, and the number of competitors. And so that kind of leads us to thinking about which industries or markets are going to have higher prices, lower prices, which ones are going to have this efficient allocation of resources, which ones aren't. Right? And so we'll talk about this concept of efficiency a little bit today, because when we say that, you know, we mentioned production possibilities, right? We talk about efficiency in that section. But then when we get here, we talk about efficiency as well. One, about kind of this allocation of resources. And two, we also talk about cost efficiencies, right? And so we'll kind of talk about both of those as we go throughout the day. In this first one. So what I want you to do, this is kind of in one of the activities just to kind of start getting your students to think about it. You would maybe introduce kind of talking a little bit about what are the characteristics of perfect competition and monopoly, okay? So I'm going to assume you already did that. And it's coming up next, so I promise I will do that. But I wanted to start here and kind of see where we were going. And so I'm going to let y'all talk maybe at your table just for a second and think about these. And I know I've just listed the extremes, and some of them we might kind of classify as imperfect, that monopolistic competition or oligopoly. But if you can, just kind of at your table, kind of talk about maybe what are your students going to talk about when they see this list. So if you can, at your table, just go down this list and kind of think about which ones are more like perfect competition and which ones are more like monopoly. And then we'll kind of come back in just a couple of seconds. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and bring it back. I'm pretty excited about how much talking is happening.
We're on number 2.
Guys, I said like a couple minutes. Okay, well, hopefully other groups got further and we'll talk about this. But Okay, we're going to bring it back, everybody. Well, do you think your students would just start going to, y'all kind of just went into it super detailed, apparently, if they got to number 2. But do you think without really giving, so I haven't given any information about perfect competition monopoly, however y'all know this, but do you think your students give them this list here and then have them kind of talk about what's the differences without necessarily jumping into perfect competition and monopoly? Do you think they could kind of separate these a little bit? What do y'all think? For some of them. Yes. Right, right. Okay, right. And that's our, yeah.
So that's just totally out of their experience.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's our classic go-to, I think, for wheat, right? That's a classic go-to that I always talk about. I have another one that I do that maybe is a little more relatable, but that's really good. So maybe on that, as we talk, we can maybe brainstorm for some other really good ideas instead of, if wheat really isn't going to connect to your students, what's something that would, right? So when we get there. So what did y'all say for wheat? More like perfect competition or monopoly? I'm all about abbreviations, so PC, y'all caught on as perfect competition, M is a monopoly. So why did y'all say PC? Why did y'all say perfect competition for wheat? Lots of farmers. Okay. Identical. What? Interchangeable. Did y'all have something?
Well, we were thinking uniform products, and
Yep.
that makes it PC. But we were thinking
I know.
large-scale agriculture too.
Yeah, I knew y'all were gonna do that.
Small farmers in this area, then that would be more like perfect competition.
Just talk, it depends, we were talking about also the scale.
The scale, absolutely.
Yeah, my town versus the country.
Yes.
And these could change a lot.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, I think we give our students the list, right? I do tables, y'all do tables like this chart that I live, that's what I do, okay? And I have them put these down, and then I say, but wait a second, how we're classifying these markets does in fact matter. And that's okay to tell them that. And you'll notice that in a lot of these exercises, it will say local market for this, or it could be, in one instance I could say it's like a monopoly, the other it's perfect competition simply because I'm saying it's a rural town and there's only one store versus, hey, if you go to Minneapolis, that's not the same story, right? And so that's a great point to just tell your students, right? It's okay that sometimes these things can change depending on how we talk about them. What about cell phone service? What y'all say? Is that more like perfect competition or monopoly? And this is all on page 129 of this one. Okay, so that it's in there. So you have the answers. More detail, a little of detail here. So cell phone service, what y'all say for that one? More like a monopoly. What do we do? How do we typically call that one a monopoly? Cell phone service. I normally throw this one out as an oligopoly. I know that's not what the question says, but that's kind of but they do have monopoly power. Now, why did y'all say more like a monopoly with the cell phone service? There's only a few, so good.
Barriers to entry.
Yes, perfect. Great.
Could you say it's starting to swing back the other way with a lot of these smaller companies starting up, like straight talk wireless?
Yeah, there's a lot more options. Yeah, that's why when we talk about cell phone service most of the time, because y'all mentioned there's a few, right? There's not one. That's our classic definition of a monopoly. We would kind of throw it in there as an oligopoly, but as you're saying, more firms are kind of there. They may only serve a very small part of the market, so they're not really going to change that landscape up there, but that's a really good kind of thing to also bring and talk about. Although there are high barriers to entry there, they're not too high if there are some kind of serving kind of that secondary market, right? What about haircuts? Right. That's a really good point, yeah. Right. Yeah. Did anyone else? That's great. That's exactly what we want them to do. There's a lot of places to get your hair cut, right? And so for some people, my husband cuts his own hair, right? But not a lot, so it's pretty easy. He's not going to hear this, so we're good, okay? But he doesn't care, right? And so to him, it's more competitive. For others, we might say, well, there is some brand loyalty I do if we want to get technical here. My curve is steeper, right, than yours. Right? I'm more inelastic because there's somebody I have to go to, right? And so a lot of times you would throw that one into maybe monopolistic competition because there are differences. We do have somebody we prefer, but it's a little more like perfect competition, right? If we were to kind of just look at these very crudely in these categories here. What else? What's next? Airline flights. Is it more like perfect competition or more like monopoly? Yeah, that's kind of what I have here. More like monopoly. Again, this is when we kind of throw into that imperfect a little bit because there's a few really big players, so we might say oligopoly, but we're seeing this monopoly. It's closer to that end. What about hamburgers? Is that more like perfect competition or monopoly? Yeah, perfect competition. Good. I a lot of times throw that one again into that intermediate, right? I'm saying that and I'm telling you to classify them this way, but we can talk about, there's a lot of them, right? But then if I ask you where you're going to get your hamburger, if you really wanted a hamburger, where would you go? Is there somewhere you would go? Do you have a preference, a really strong preference? Okay, I do, for sure. So Culver's, Five Guys, that's a good one. Man, I miss Beefers. There's a place where I grew up. It was called Beefers, the best hamburger, right? Beef makes sense. Okay, so that's in middle one. There's a lot of firms, pretty close to the same, but little differences. And then soft drinks. What'd you say about that one? Yes.
Or if you're at a big city supermarket, or,
Yeah. Good. Did y'all have anything else to add on that one? That one here, when we talk about this one, as you said, it really depends. I love that. It depends. That's the classic answer that we always give anyway. But when we look at the soft drinks, right, a lot of times we're going to say that one's a little more like a monopoly because there are a few really big players that own like a lot, like 90-something% of the market.
Now they're going in and buying out competitors.
Yep.
Diversifying their product line.
Yes, so I love talking about, I spend a lot of time talking about soft drinks. I have my students do a taste test in class. Do y'all do that? I do the Pepsi challenge. They're like, what are you talking about? The Pepsi. So they have Coke and Pepsi and they have to drink it and then they have to say which one they think it is, and half the time they get it right. One semester I poured RC in all of it and they were very convinced that one was Coke and one was Pepsi. And so you can really talk about this perception, these perceived differences. And then I love talking about kind of antitrust laws. I love getting into that as well. Do any of y'all get into that? Y'all mentioned the role of government. In my managerial class, it's more applied, so we talk about this, but then we spend several classes looking at what does the government do about this? I'm going to go take over my competitors. Hey, that's sometimes not such a great thing, okay? So this right here, so now I'm going to jump into perfect competition, okay? And we'll go fast on this or slow, depending on what y'all want to do. This is a picture. This is my investigative reporting. I was at a farmer's market, and we debated about this, didn't we? This is a farmer's market in Fayetteville, okay? And I saw this. Now, I show this to my students, and this is the example we come back to throughout kind of our talk on market structures if we're talking about perfect competition. Now, I asked them, what's underneath that 3? Don't say it out loud. Think about it for a second. So you can see there's 2 things, right? What's underneath? What do y'all think? Think lower. End of the day. 1. Okay. It's a 4. Okay, it was a 4. Yeah. But what y'all are saying would be another option, and I can talk about that in a second. Well, we can go the other direction. This one happened to be a 4. Now, I'm telling you that, so now that I've said 4, what do you think was going on here? Why would that be a 4, and then now there's a 3 on top?
Somebody showed up.
Somebody else showed up. So we get there pretty early. We could walk. to our little downtown farmers market. And you get there early. There's only one person really set up yet, right? And so they have their spinach set up. And it said 4. But as it gets a little bit later, what happens? Competition, right? People start to show up. Other sellers start to show up. And what happens? Why did he have to change it to 3? Why couldn't he leave it at 4? Somebody else had a 3-up, right? Somebody else had a 3-up. So what would have happened if he left it at 4 and somebody else put their spinach up for $3? What would have happened? Nothing. I wouldn't have bought it, right? And why is that? Why is it that I am so concerned about price that if there were 2 next to each other, one said 4, so one said 3, I'm going to go to the one that says 3? Why is that? It's spinach is spinach, right? Spinach is spinach, right? Most of the time, when you go to the farmer's market, quality is pretty close to the same thing. Maybe the variety at each stand is different, so you might be inclined to say, I'm just going to get it all here, right? But a lot of times, there's spinach is spinach. Wheat is wheat. I say that a gazillion times throughout the semester. Spinach is spinach, right? And that's the perfect substitutes that we were talking about, right? If we left our price at 4, nobody would buy it. So we're saying, I'm going to go to the table in a second, but if we're talking about, let's talk about elasticity for a second. Okay, I love it. That's another one of my favorites. Like, how do consumers respond to price changes? That's it. It's a fancy word. Just how do we behave, right? What is that saying? If we have perfect substitutes, and I only care about price, and that if your price is 4, I'm going to go to whoever has it cheaper. What does that tell us about the demand curve, essentially? How would y'all think about that? It's very elastic, very, very elastic, and a lot of times we're going to say it's perfectly elastic, right? And so I do like word association, perfect competition, perfect substitute, wheat is wheat, spinach is spinach. That tells me I don't care who I buy it from, I only care about the price that's perfectly elastic. And that if you raise your price just a penny, I don't buy it from you, right? And so this is the example I start this whole section on. And students, usually they're like, wait, what about organic? And then they kind of go a different way. But we can really hone in on, as you said, we're defining the market and looking at that. And we said more people can show up, right? That's this barriers to entry. There's nothing stopping you from growing wheat in your backyard. Oh, wait, spinach. I could do that. I'm growing spinach in my backyard. I could go sell it at the farmer's market. There's probably a little fee to set up, but I could do it, right? And that's at the heart of kind of this perfectly competitive environment. So these tables are everywhere, and they're in your lesson. So if you were to look at, well, I think so this one here where it says Introduction to Market Structures, there's a table. I loved this one. I think I gave you 2 tables. Yeah, there's another one in the other lesson. This is, to me, the best way to kind of organize this information in an easy way for students to really compare and contrast. So there's this one right here, and then there's also another one in that second activity available right here. So you have different ones depending on what you like. I apparently just made my own here, added some extra rows. But when I look at perfect competition, as we said, right, I have it blank. I didn't do the animation. I'm just going to pop it all up there for y'all. Okay? We said lots of firms. Okay, perfect substitutes. And what I really want to stress to students at this point is that type of product tells us what the demand curve looks like. It tells us price sensitivity, right? We said they're perfect substitutes. That says, y'all said very elastic. In this case, we're going to be perfectly elastic. And so I really want to, you've spent some time talking about supply and demand. You've talked about elasticity. Give it to them again. Elasticity, right, that what our demand curve looks like comes from the type of product that we have. So link that clearly together for them. And then we said price taker or maker. Do they have market power? Do they have the ability to charge a markup? Well, we said if somebody else charges it for 3, I got to also charge 3, right? That's the concept of a price taker, okay? And then y'all said no barriers to entry. And then that right there tells us these profits in the long run, they can't make any, right? If there are no barriers to entry, they can't protect them, right? If I see you earning profits over there, well, I'm just going to grow spinach in my backyard and try to sell it too. And there's nothing stopping me from doing that, right? And then the classic example I have here is agriculture. Wheat is wheat, spinach is spinach. A couple other examples that these have. You'll notice this one says your local agricultural market, right? We said that the size or the definition matters. And then here it says stocks and foreign exchange market. Those are a couple of other examples that are interesting. I think most of the time I spend just talking about kind of this perfect competition, spinach, wheat kind of situation. Okay. Now, I spend a lot of time on that, so that's okay. I love it. Where do y'all want to go from here? What's the next thing y'all would talk to your students about?
Double scale.
Huh?
Double scale.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. Good, good. So I have, these are just the characteristics. I put it in this table. I'm going to just go through the slides just fast. Here, Lisa mentioned profit maximization. This is all that is, okay? I'll leave it in here. I'm going to go. We know profit maximization is going to happen at marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, okay, right? When that last unit, the cost of that last unit is exactly equal to the additional revenue you get from that last unit. That's going to be your profit maximization point. I spend a ton of time talking about this now after I introduce perfect competition because it's the same for everybody. It doesn't matter if we're talking about monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopoly. Every single firm determines their price, or sorry, their quantity this way. Okay, and so, whoopsies. And then, do y'all graph in your class? Do y'all use graphs to kind of talk about this? A little bit? It's here. I'm going to leave it all in there, but one thing you'll notice here is that we have, I can't move it, but the demand curve, right? That MR curve right there, that's our demand curve, right? We said it was perfectly elastic, okay? And so that's how the firm, they're going to take that market price as given, and it doesn't matter how many units they sell because they're all really small. They're not big enough to impact that market price, and that's really at the heart of this price taker component, okay? And so there's their profit. The zero profit condition, we talked about this entry and exit. And then right there, I do want to make that point. When we talked about efficiency, okay, we said we have a couple of different ways to think about this. One is in terms of costs, okay. I have this one. I brought this one. One of my students drew this. This is what that graph would look like, okay, if it were the long run. And what you'll notice is this quantity right here happens at that minimum point, okay? And that's a really big concept for us to introduce because no other firms are going to operate there when they're breaking even in the long run. And so we look at the efficiencies in perfect competition, the cost. They're getting to that minimum point of average total cost. They're exhausting all of those economies of scale. Okay, where all that's saying is their average total costs are decreasing as their quantity increases. They get all the way to the minimum point. Nobody else does. Okay, and so that's the zero profit condition. And then this one right here adds the welfare component. Okay, the welfare component. Do y'all talk about surplus, consumer surplus, producer surplus, and market surplus, right? How well off is the consumer? How well off is the producer? And then how well off is the market together, right? So that's kind of the basic definition of these terms. And what we notice is with perfect competition, we do in fact maximize total market surplus. There is nothing left on the table, right? That last unit is being sold, as you can see, for prices equal to marginal cost. That last unit is being sold for exactly what it cost the firm to make. That last unit, right? That's the marginal concept, right? So nothing can make them better off. This is all of the gains from trade have been exhausted, okay? And so that's kind of the other efficiency concept. We talk about costs, but we also talk about welfare, right? And that's talking about this maximizes total market surplus. Now I'm going to switch to monopoly. What would y'all say? So number of firms, typically one, right? The type, yeah.
Jennifer, there is a question.
Yeah.
Are these slides available?
Yes. Absolutely. I'll email them to y'all over break. Just get it done. Okay, yes, they will absolutely be available. And all of this is in your packet somewhere in these lessons. Okay, we're going to go to Monopoly here. Number of firms, right? There's one. Oh, it's all. I just did it all. There you go. Okay. The classic example I used here is public utilities. Okay, what do y'all use when y'all introduce monopolies? What are some examples? One firm, unique products, it's the only place you can get it, right? We said if you look at that demand curve, if it's unique, then it's relatively inelastic, right? Not very price sensitive because you don't have a lot of options. You have to go to this person. They have market power, huge barriers to entry, and then public utilities. What are some other examples that y'all might introduce or your students might kind of identify if we're talking about monopolies?
Well, we're in our town's 5,000. We have one grocery store. So
Yeah.
And then we used to have about 4 or 5 gas stations, and then Quick Trip came in.
Oh, there you go.
And they pretty much run everybody out. Now we're down to 2 gas stations, 3 gas stations, 2 for Quick Trip.
Yep.
So.
There you go. That's great, right? We talked about geography, right? In a small town, that's going to be a very, very close example. They're going to see that, right? There's one place to go. Okay. What else? What's something else y'all might kind of throw in here?
I would use historical example, Standard Oil.
Yes. Yeah, Standard Oil. Do y'all talk about that in any? I talk about that when I go to antitrust laws. I really talk about, they broke it up 33. I just did that, so I love it. But yeah, classic examples. So a lot of y'all said history. Y'all are doing history of some type. That's an easy one to kind of sneak in when you're talking about some of the, some of that. It's a really good one.
One movie theater.
Yes. Yeah, right. Great. And so the examples in your packets here, y'all got them. So a small town newspaper, that was one. A rural gas station. This one, regulated public utilities. That's the one that I use most of the time. And then the last one here is companies with patents. Okay. And why are patents important? What's going on with patents? Why do we talk about patents now with monopolies? Yeah.
Because you're so owner of that technology.
Yeah.
You have control over price for a set amount of time.
Yeah. You're the sole owner, right? You're the only one that can produce it. So for at least this, what is it like? I want to say like 17, 20, something around there. For a period of time, you are the only one, right? So you get that monopoly power and you get that ability to control price, right? Some of y'all shook your head when I said public utilities. Why is that an example here for monopolies? Why is that one that we could maybe say for monopolies as well?
Excel is the only option.
Everybody says Excel. That's it. That's the only option. Okay. Another aspect of this is if you think about the cost structure, and I'm terrible at explaining this, so I usually have one of my students, they're really good at this. There are huge fixed costs, right, to put that infrastructure, put that system in place, and there are relatively small marginal costs to add another consumer, another household. And so that's one of the reasons we have one, but that is an example of what we call a natural monopoly, and that I think about it is it just makes sense for one firm to serve the entire market output than multiple firms, because then your costs would be higher because everybody would have to put in that infrastructure, and that's just a waste. Okay, and so I don't. When I say natural monopoly, students go water, diamonds, natural resources. No, it's just going to happen, right? It's what makes sense. Barriers to entry, right? We mentioned those already when we talk about monopolies. That is kind of one of the identifying characteristics of a monopoly, or these barriers to entry. How many of y'all talk about De Beers in your class? What do y'all say? Let's update my examples. What do y'all talk about when y'all mention De Beers?
They're losing that.
So, yep.
That power they once had.
They're losing the power. There's more detail in the packet. So if you want some more, it gives some more background.
Tell everybody that they got a giant
Yep, yep,
There's enough diamonds for everybody, but
yep. Do y'all reference a movie? Blood Diamond? That's the one I mention here. And I say in the end, that company buys the diamonds and they lock it in a vault. Right? That's
Created the demand for it.
right.
No one really cared about diamonds.
Diamonds are forever. I tell my class, well, that's why you kind of have diamond rings here, right? If there's a lot of them and there wasn't monopoly power, we'd probably have something else, right? We have been conditioned. Diamonds are forever. That's just where there's one on here. Large advertising costs. We have convinced people this is it. Okay, but when I think about De Beers, yes, I think there's a little more detail in your packet. It used to be like huge numbers, and I think 2,000 is when it says they really kind of we're done. We're not really going to try to do that anymore. But that's kind of the single firm owns a key resource. The next one that I have here, patents and copyrights. We kind of touched on that. This is where I might mention Shark Tank. Do y'all watch that? Do your students watch that? I say, what's one of the first questions they ask somebody when they walk in there? Do you have a patent? Do you have a patent? Can I just, what is it, Kevin, who's like, I'm just going to do the same thing, right? What's going to stop me from doing that? I'll do it better than you anyway, right? A patent. And so I think that's the example for me. Students will be like, oh yeah, right? They're watching some of that, and let's bring it in and make that connection very obvious for them, right? The natural monopoly is kind of the public utilities example. Large advertising costs, I talk about that as a barrier to entry as well. And then distribution networks. Okay, somebody just has that thing down. Okay. Okay. And so those are the barriers to entry that I have listed here. I'm not going to go through the graphs so much, but you can see that demand curve is downward sloping. They are the market. So this looks like your regular supply or demand curve that you introduced, way back with supply, demand, quantity demanded, law of demand. This is what it looks like because they are the market. That's it. Right? We don't have to distinguish between the firm and the market. They are the market. Okay? And what we notice here is there's their profit, but here you go. That's a competitive outcome, right? That's the competitive, right? If we were saying perfect competition, right, the previous example, you see I have that labeled consumer and producer surplus. The whole thing is shaded in. That's the point I make for them. The whole thing is taken up. Then I say, well, let's look at a monopolist. Is the whole thing going to be shaded in here? No, okay? There's their quantity, right? As I said before, MR is equal to MC. That's all they did. They said, wait a second, I have market power, right? I can find that quantity and say, what's the most I can get people to pay, right? That's what the demand curve, that's your definition of a demand curve. It represents the maximum price consumers are willing and able to pay, right? That's what they're going to say. What is that quantity that's the best for me? And let's try to get all of that from the consumer, right? And then there's the price. And we see right there that price is above marginal cost. That's a markup. Right, that's kind of where that definition of market power comes from. There's consumer surplus, producer surplus a little bit bigger than before. And then I say, wait a second, something's missing, right? And what do we call that piece right there? Do y'all remember? Do y'all talk about that? It's a deadweight loss, okay? Essentially, it's just there are trades that could happen that didn't happen. Right? If we think about, I don't know where to point. I'm going to point over here, okay? So here this demand curve represents price, and this is our marginal cost curve. All of these goods could have traded, right? Here's the price. It's the value of the consumer. Here's the cost that the firm incurred to produce that last one. We saw in perfect competition, all of those happened. But when we talk about monopoly, there's stuff left on the table because they want to, in the De Beers example, restrict output to keep their price high. Right? And so that's when I talk about the deadweight loss. If you were going to calculate the area of that triangle, half, times the base, restrict output, times the height, push price high. And so I really try to, that's the phrase that I use over and over again with them, restrict output to keep price high. And that really outlines that deadweight loss beautifully. Okay, and so that's not a rectangle, that's a triangle, really shows us the difference in efficiency between perfect competition and monopoly. Right? That's a clear distinguishing factor here. And that firms with market power do in fact lead to this deadweight loss, right? There are trades that could happen, but don't happen, okay? Okay, I think I'm gonna stop here with these two and then do our activity and see how we go. Does anybody have any questions about what I've covered so far, or maybe some tips or suggestions on how somebody might answer a question students might struggle with? Any comments here? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the activity. Before I do, I just want to show you those lessons. So activity 1, activity 2, so this set right here, okay, this set in there. The first activity, so everything I've given to you has step-by-step instructions of exactly what you might do in your class. Take it or leave it. Take parts of it, take all of it, right? Just take what you need. And then the reason I have this one here is because I really liked activity 1. Okay? I really liked activity 1. It's a little bit of reading for them to do, but those tables, essentially you're getting the students to fill out the table based on kind of a description of various markets, right? So the first one talks about cucumbers. The second one talks about haircuts, right? That's one that we threw out before. The third one is about breakfast cereal, and then the fourth one is about diamonds. And so this one gives you a lot of information about De Beers, okay? Because that is, when we introduce it, that's the classic example we go to. And then we can kind of go to the ones that our students might more readily identify with, which would be kind of the local markets. But I really liked this one. There's a lot that you can go into. It talks about antitrust laws. It talks about collusion, barriers to entry. So I think this is a really good exercise for you, no matter how, if you just touch the surface of talking about these market structures, or if you wanted to really dive deep and talk about maybe price discrimination, collusion, these antitrust laws. This gives you that opportunity. So I think this is one where you could use it as an introduction, or you could really use it to get them to fill out that table on their own. Okay, so I thought that was a good one, because a lot of times I just throw it up there and we start going through it, but why not let them discover it on their own? Okay, so I think this was a really good, it's a little bit of reading, I don't know, maybe as a homework assignment, and then come back, however you want to do that one. And then the last bit, I want to move into our activity. I'm a little over on my scheduled time, but we've talked about all the activities. So what I want to do is I'm going to give everybody a poker chip. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to, if y'all can pass those out. And then I have to pretend to be two people. So that'll be fun. Okay. So this activity is from the bigger set. Okay, this perfect competition versus monopoly. Essentially what this does is it simulates a competitive market, okay? And so the activity, it walks step by step through this, kind of here you should introduce these concepts, and then show this slide, and then talk about kind of what we're doing. And then you can go, like I said, this is one, if you like graphs, you can take it that far. If you don't have to go that far. It really just depends on what you want to do. And so in this example, you each have a resource. So a lot of times we talk about the goods and services market, or we could talk about the resource market. This is a resource. You have this to sell. Now, I don't think that's going to be confusing. Okay? I think sometimes we can get a little confusing if we talk about the labor market, because then supply and demand are different, but you don't have to go into that to really hit this point home. We all have the same poker chip, okay? And so it doesn't have to be a poker chip, it's anything that's exactly the same, okay? I think I used it poker chips one time and that worked fine, but you need 14. If you have a class of more than that, you can do 2 of them, or you can just have 14 people come to the front and kind of do it. And then it's really cool if you have people that aren't participating and kind of help them figure it out if they don't get to it on their own. Okay, so are y'all ready to do this? We're going to actually get up and do this, okay? So I'm going to say this table over here is going to be market 1. Okay, so I'm going to put a 1 here. And then this table over here, not y'all, just like this location, is market 2. Okay? And so I'm going to give you, I'm just going to let y'all do it, and then we'll pretend we know what happens with those, so I can kind of guide. So what happens is you each have an identical resource. If you're following along, I'm on procedure like 2-3, right? Explain to the class. The goal here is to get as much money as possible from selling that poker chip, that resource. And there are 2 options. You can go to market 1, or you could go to market 2. Okay? And so your decision is which market. That's it. Okay? So it says your resource rots quickly. So you can't save it for another time period, right? It's now or nothing, okay? And so what happens is there's 1 and 2. You have about a minute, and I'm going to let you, everybody's going to get up, and you're going to move to whichever market you want to sell your good to, okay? And the demand for your resource, for your poker chip, is the same in both of them. So these are 2 identical markets. The demand curve is the same, okay? And you have a minute, and you can freely move between them. So if you want to change your mind for some reason, you're free to do that. Okay. So I'm going to give you a second to just think about this. Okay. We're going to let it happen. That's pretty easy to follow, right? Nothing fancy there. 2 markets. You have a resource. It's the same. They're going to pay, essentially, if we're saying the demand curves are the same, whatever price you're going to get over here, we'll think about that. That demand curve, right, price and quantity, is the same over here. Okay, so the demand curve is the same. Okay. Now, go. So I want you to get up, please. Because you don't have to say that, do you? Just we're going to get up. And there's an online simulation. Okay, so I can show you that in a second. But I want you to get up. Everybody has to participate. Everybody has to participate. And you have to choose either market 1 or market 2. And again, you can freely move back and forth if you want. Yeah, so you're selling this to that firm 1 and firm 2. There's nobody really there. And the demand curves are the same. How many of y'all are there? There's 12, right? So 6.
So there are 12.
Yeah, there's 12 poker chips. What if I were playing? Where would I go? So we have 2. So y'all actually got it. You're done. But just kind of think how y'all got up and did it. Okay? So I have 2 poker chips left. If I go here with this poker chip, thank you. Okay, good. Hopefully y'all did it. That's great. Hopefully you do know. But so if I bring this poker chip over here, where should this one go? Over there. Okay, do you think your students would get up and go half and half right away? It doesn't happen easily. Okay, so what happens is you have people kind of go, and then somebody's saying, wait a second, how many are over here? How many are over there? Then they're going to move. And, somebody's going to figure that out. And so that's why if you have more than 14 people playing, right, they're going to be really kind of like, wait, you go that way. They're going to really tell them kind of what's going on. Okay, and so I think you all got it. Fantastic. Good job. Okay, that's it. Sorry, y'all took like 2 seconds. Okay. But y'all don't think your students they don't get it that fast.
They wouldn't understand the concept. Like, where I was like, where's the...
Okay.
Like, that whole thing would take...
You could have. So if you wanted, I think it doesn't talk about that so much, but you could have somebody. If you had extra people, you could have somebody be here. And I'm seller or buyer 1. Would that make it clear, do you think? I'm buyer 1, and they're buyer 2, and we're the same. That's essentially, you have to make that very clear that each of these people are the same.
So like you had the same amount of money or something.
Yep, the demand curve is the same. So if I give you 5 units, there's a certain price, but if you give them 5 units, that's the same price, right?
Just give them the graph. This is your
Yeah, so that's part of this. So yeah, you could do that. And so I'm going to, here is behind the scenes what's going on, okay? So there are these two demand curves, okay? And so they look a little funky. It's just because we have a specific amount, okay? And you have to make sure, you need 14 to follow this, right, in order for this to work. So based on ours, what price would everybody have gotten?
4? We have 6 in each?
Yeah, so you have 6 in each, so that's $4. The lesson, again, is based on 14. So if it was 7 and 7, what would everybody get? 3. Okay, so that matches what we think. Quantity goes up, price goes down. Everything's happy, okay? But what would happen is you could show this. Right? I typically think I want to let them figure it out first and then show them this and say, okay, wait a second. What if the split was 8 and 6, right? And we kind of got there. What would happen if market 1 had 8? What price would they get? What would market 2 get if they had 6? Okay, so what would happen? What would happen? People would move, right? People would move. That's that barriers to entry, free entry and exit. You have to make that clear. Let them, you can't, you're stuck where you pick, right? Let them kind of go back and forth because this is what's happening, okay? And so in the activity, again, y'all did fantastic. Took 2 seconds, so that's great for time today. But let me ask you this one. This is when you start talking about kind of profits a little bit. At least you would get into revenue, right? So if each firm, it says if each firm, resource owner, so now I'm talking about these people. So you, a resource owner, you receive $3 when you sell your output. What is the total amount earned by all the resource owners? So that's the poker chips. You are resource owners, right? How much money did y'all as a whole make?
Per market or total?
Total. So there were 7 in each market, and each person earned $3 a piece, right? So our total,
42.
total. So each market had 21, our total would be 42. So you can kind of get into a little bit of revenue there. What's the total amount earned? You can start talking about revenue. And then the fact about the 7 and 7 split, right? We said if it was 8 in one market and 6 in the other, right? This one with 8 would only get $2, whereas this one over here with 6 would get $3, okay? And if we left it that way, they'd get 4, right? They'd get 4, right? And this is where if you want to talk about kind of opportunity cost, right? They're over here. So if they moved, what are they giving up, right? That's kind of one way to talk about it, what happens. And that leads you to the discussion of marginal benefit and marginal cost, okay? And so you can get to that efficient allocation, right? Once we get to 7 and 7, nobody has an incentive to change, right? That's when we talk about kind of an equilibrium, a long-run equilibrium especially. We would say nobody has an incentive to change what they're doing, right? And if somebody moved, somebody else would be uncomfortable. Somebody would want to move too. And that would lead to us where we're not in an equilibrium. We're not at that efficient allocation of resources. And so you can talk about that a little bit there. You can think about, there's so many places to go, but even if you just did that first bit that we did here, I think that's a really good exercise to at least introduce them to this concept of, well, if the markets are the same, the quantity is going to be the same, free barriers to entry, you can get into efficiency a little bit. Then the next question, I do like this one, is what if the demand curves weren't exactly the same? The products are the same, so your poker chip is still the same. But what if your firms were a little bit different? So the demand curves, those prices, quantity lines wouldn't be identical like this. What would happen? So what would the two prices, essentially I want to kind of get to the prices, would the two prices in each market, so again we're saying they're not identical, similar, right? They're pretty close. It's the same product, but maybe one's bigger, one's smaller. What would the two prices in each market have ended up if they weren't the same? So the demand curves aren't the same. What would happen to the prices? Would they be different? So if the demand curves are a little bit different, okay, the question is, would we get to where the prices are the same? It may not be
Total revenue or the individual price per resource?
the individual price per resource.
I would imagine people would, there'd be more movement
Okay,
until I found the equilibrium
okay.
or something like
Would the equilibrium be 7 and 7 if the demand curves aren't the same? No. Okay. So I think that allows you to start talking about there's going to be more movement, right? Because we're going to see, you know, maybe this market can in fact handle more units and the prices in the end will be the same. But it's just because the demand curves are a little bit different, the quantity's not going to be the same, but the prices will. So people will then fluctuate back and forth until the prices are the same, right? So we're still getting to that. The prices are the same. Maybe one's just a higher demand producer. A lot of times when we talk about different markets, you might have a high demand consumer or producer and a low demand consumer and producer. So maybe their quantity that they can handle is higher and theirs is a little bit lower. But yeah.
Maybe do this activity taking steps, so
Yep.
at this particular point, the price goes up.
Yeah. You could, yeah, you could maybe, I think, introduce a demand shift, right? That would be a nice way to get that price to go up. Because that's all I would be saying is if the demand curve increased, say something happened, this firm, I don't know, is cooler, they did some PR thing, or I don't know, right? And then that demand curve would in fact shift and you would see that price going up, right? So that would be kind of an extension. Yeah, that'd be really great. Okay, I think we're about done. Here, this just gives you a little more about perfect competition in the lesson. So these PowerPoints are actually available online. So mine, I just took these from the book itself. So I'll show you all that at the end of the day. I'll come back and do that in the resource part. The next bit, the last bit of this one, does talk about, if you are comfortable with the graphs and such, this will get you to see kind of what would happen if this were the demand curve and marginal cost curve in a perfectly competitive environment versus that which would be a monopoly, okay? And so if this were a perfectly competitive market, so we've said they're all the same, barriers to entry, there are none, this is the market demand curve, right? So we know the firm demand curve would be perfectly elastic like this, okay? What would the price be in a perfectly competitive world here? Where are they going to price at? $10. Why is it 10? That's right. Why is it 10? Yeah. Yeah, so when we talk about perfect competition, right, they get to that point where price is exactly equal to marginal cost. And so this is a nice introduction to say if this were perfectly competitive, we're going to price at $10 and we'll have 80 units, okay? Because if they were determining their profit maximizing output, they would look at that demand curve, which is their price, and we would set it equal to marginal cost. So they're going to get to that price is equal to marginal cost, right? We said that was kind of that one of the reasons we got to that efficient allocation of resources. The next one is to say, well, what would a monopolist do? Are they going to produce 80? No. Right? They're not going to produce 80. You would kind of have to ask them, you know, monopolists are going to maximize profit, okay? And so you would kind of go down which one gives us kind of the highest profit, and you would eventually get there in looking at, you know, 40 minus 10 would be 34, 20 units. You could just calculate the profits as you go. And so that's just another extension if you wanted to talk about the monopoly example, okay? And that one, they end up at $30 if if you were to kind of calculate these rectangles, it's kind of how I think about it, which one would give you the most, and that one would be there. Okay. That's all I have for this one. And again, there's a lot more detail in this, step by step. If you have any questions, you look at it over break. I can kind of walk you through it if there's anything there. But I'm going to go ahead and end the first session. We're a little over, but that's okay. We went a little long in the morning. Okay, are we okay? That was fast, but I think we kind of had that activity. I think it was a good introduction there. Do you think your student, that would be a good way to kind of introduce perfect competition? Do you think they would get that? The other part is there's an online simulation. So if this one, if you wanted to do it, essentially it has, this is that demand curve. And then there are 14 resources, and then you say, okay, here's the first one. Okay, if we give them to market 1, there's the price and quantity. And then if we give that one to market 2, you can see, okay, they're the same. Then what happens if they're a little equal? And then it says, okay, where should the next person go? Should they go to market 1 or market 2? There. And so it allows you to kind of use this. If maybe getting up and doing it, you can kind of see if everybody goes to that market, well, hey, wait a second, I can get a higher price over here, so let's go, oh wait, to that one, right? And then they kind of equal out a little bit, and then you can see, you can do that simulation for all of them, and then there's a little further activity there to help out. Okay, so this is essentially the same thing we did. Instead of getting up and moving around, you could just do it online. Or have them play with it as homework and then come to class and talk about it. And you could use that as an example. And I'll leave that. That's in the PowerPoints that I'll send out. And I'll show you how to get there later on today. Okay?